For the first time, the biologist fed the Indominus Rex, but he accidentally included his own hand, accompanied by the sickening crunch of breaking finger bones. He began to laugh maniacally, and a nearby colleague didn't even try to stop him. Instead, he opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Because, at long last, humanity had successfully bred an explosive Indominus Rex. However, John Nan, witnessing this scene, quite literally wet himself from pure terror. This was exactly like a fragment he remembered seeing from Jurassic Park. If he recalled correctly, to prevent accidental deaths, the Jurassic World originally had two Indominus Rexes, a male and a female. The female had eaten the male, and he was precisely the one currently being devoured. Just when John Nan thought he was doomed, a digital panel suddenly appeared before him. The genetic fusion simulator was the very game he used to play in his previous life. By hunting other animals, he would be able to fuse their genes into his own. The bite force of a T-Rex, the running speed of a velociraptor, the killer giant teeth of a Giganotosaurus, and the camouflage of a cuttlefish. He also possessed rapid growth and the heat-sensing abilities of a viper. John Nan carefully listed his current genetic capabilities, realizing the potential he held. He knew his most important task right now was to grow discreetly and then escape this park, because according to the movie's plot, Jurassic World would eventually go bankrupt due to the Indominus Rex's rampage, and even Isla Nublar itself was in danger. The island would eventually be destroyed by the eruption of a dormant volcano. Meanwhile, we see Dr. Wu approaching with 2 pieces of fresh meat and a satisfied smile on his face. The Indominus Rex was his masterpiece, and he was certain it would bring massive revenue to Jurassic World. However, just as he was feeding the creature, the Indominus Rex suddenly lunged upward again. It opened its mouth, filled with massive killer teeth, and fixed its gaze directly on the doctor. Wu was nearly bitten, with the creature almost tearing his fingers clean off in a single snap. He simply laughed, claiming this was how it should be, even as blood began to flow freely from his hand. Dr. Wu didn't even flinch. Instead, his smile seemed to grow even brighter and more unsettling. At that moment, John Nan deeply felt the raw cruelty and violence inherent in the Giganotosaurus genes. We see that the female Indominus Rex, Dr. Wu's explosive creation, had been rebellious and merciless since the day she was born. It was becoming clear to him that he needed to accelerate his own development, or he would never truly be able to defeat her. Although it was his first time eating raw meat, the dinosaur's taste buds ensured that John Nan actually enjoyed it quite a bit. A notification appeared. He had consumed beef, earning him 0.2 genetic points. By the time his stomach was finally full, John Nan had only managed to scrape together a single genetic point. John Nan scratched his hand thoughtfully before deciding to invest this point into his blood's growth capacity. He chose the Bucci gene because while their life cycle is incredibly short, their growth rate is exceptionally fast. To be honest, it's quite impressive. A Bucci only needs 50 short days to go from birth to full adulthood. And this rapid transformation is precisely what John Nan needs most urgently right now. He knew that only by growing quickly would he have enough power to protect himself in this place. Time passed quickly, and 3 days later, we find that John Nan has finally accumulated 10 genetic points. Every single one of them was funneled into the rapid growth capability of the Bucci gene. As the genetic points took hold, a sudden surge of heat radiated through Jiannen's entire body. The Bucci gene had successfully reached level 2, effectively doubling his current rate of growth. John Nan was delighted, realizing that prioritizing this specific genetic ability had been the right move after all. After all, the explosive Indominus Rex also possesses raptor genes and the ability to grow at an alarming speed. But now, Jiannen's growth speed has effectively doubled, giving him a much-needed edge. He believed that with a stronger, larger physique and the advantage of his human soul's intelligence, he would have no reason to fear her. Time passed quickly, and a few days later, both dinosaurs were sent to Jurassic World to prevent any possibility of escape. Before they were moved, tracking chips were implanted right in front of them. On the way to the park, he found himself locked inside a narrow, lightless cage. It was then that John Nan realized, quite deeply, that these humans didn't view him as a living being at all. To them, he was nothing more than a tool designed to generate profit. Since he was no longer human, he told himself he had to be prepared to treat humanity as his enemy in the future. A few hours later, John Nan and the explosive Indominus Rex were delivered together to their new territory. This was Paddock 11, located in the northernmost reaches of Jurassic World. The enclosure was formidable, surrounded by reinforced concrete walls reaching 12 meters into the sky. Tempered glass observation stands had been built into the middle of the structure. As we enter the enclosure, we see a landscape designed to mimic a lush tropical jungle. John Nan knew that this would be the future home for both himself and the Indominus Rex. Though calling it a home is a bit of a stretch, in reality, it was no different from a cage. The towering walls made him feel like a frog living at the bottom of a very deep well. Even John Nan felt that if he were given the chance, he might be able to escape this place. However, he knew it was far too early to attempt a breakout just yet. Even if he managed to escape by chance, the humans outside could easily recapture him. Meanwhile, the Indominus Rex, having just arrived, was already becoming incredibly irritable. She was running constantly through the enclosure, tearing at the walls with her teeth and scratching at them with her claws. Nan, on the other hand, observed the enclosure with a calm focus, quickly becoming familiar with his new surroundings. When he looked up at the glass stands, he found that while he couldn't see through the one-way glass, he could see through the light. However, he still couldn't perceive things clearly with his eyes alone. Fortunately, he could rely on the heat-sensing capabilities he inherited from his snake genes. He could track the infrared heat signatures radiating from the nearby human bodies. These humans have no idea that while they stare into the abyss is staring right back at them. Nan paid them no mind, calculating that today marked exactly 1 week since his transformation. By now, the power of his Tyrannosaurus gene had successfully increased to level 2. His muscular strength had doubled, as he had invested most of the genetic points accumulated over the last few days into that specific trait. We see Nan open his attribute panel to check his progress. He is now a 7-day-old male Indominus Rex. In just 1 week, his physical size has increased significantly, which is quite impressive, to say the least. He knew that, to the humans, he was either a threat to be eliminated or a beast to be enslaved. The furious Indominus Rex let out a deafening roar, realizing she couldn't escape the arena. She had no choice but to give up, until suddenly, the familiar sound of machinery echoed from outside the wall. It was the sound of food arriving at the feeding stations. Nan went to eat as usual, but he discovered that the restless Indominus had already seized all the mutton for herself. She even growled at him, flashing a fierce warning as she stood protectively over the food. This was their very first interaction, and as we know, establishing status in the wild is everything. The magnetic storm Tyrannosaurus Rex from the movies probably looked exactly like this. In those stories, the protagonist was always hounded by the beast until it finally devoured him. But here, Nan holds the advantage in both size and strength as the battle begins. Naturally, he wasn't going to be polite, delivering a sharp blow to her head before grabbing her neck. The magnetic storm Rex fought back immediately, clearly unwilling to give an inch of ground. Nan was the first to land a solid bite, clamping down on her neck and twisting with immense force. He suddenly slammed her to the ground, yet even as she fell heavily, she continued to squint and bare her teeth. With her neck stiff and refusing to surrender, what followed was a relentless physical lesson from Nan. We shouldn't be fooled by the way Nan moves. He is far more dangerous than he looks. His doubled strength inflicts massive damage, and that magnetic force is proving to be absolutely fatal. After a few minutes of being continuously pinned to the floor, the magnetic Rex finally had enough and exposed her belly in submission. Deep down, he likely thought she was quite weak, and now she finally knew who the boss was. Only then did Nan let her go, leaving her to wait while he enjoyed the meal. Taming animals, as it turns out, really does have to start from a very young age. The magnetic storm Rex remained lying on the ground, completely still, not daring to move. She could only watch in silence as Nan ate his fill and finished the meal. Only after a short cry from him was the magnetic storm Rex finally permitted to eat. By the way, we should probably give her a name of her own. We might remember that the leader of the trained raptors in the film was called Blue. And since the skin of this magnetic storm Rex is a dull, stony shade, we shall call her Gray. So great is. In the following days, Jiannen's daily routine included one more task, conducting various training sessions with Gray. In the blink of an eye, they reached the day they turned 3 months old. Inside arena number 11, a live sow was released. Moving through the dense brush, Nan and Gray approached from the left and right, closing in silently behind the sow. The next second, Nan suddenly pounced with the speed of a lightning bolt. He leaped and lunged downward, knocking the sow to the ground as she let out panicked squeals. He bit the sow's neck, and at that very moment, Gray had also closed the distance. She opened her mouth and bit deep into the sow's belly. Not long after, the sow had completely lost her breath. He had killed a domestic pig, earning himself 5 gene points. We see that domestic pig genes can now be extracted. Should he extract genes like robustness? Should he proceed with the extraction? Robustness? He decided to forget it. Nan added the 5 newly acquired gene points to the rapid growth of the BCI gene instead. Level 3 rapid growth tripled Jiannen's growth rate, significantly boosting his current combat power. Killing fierce tigers and brown bears, modern savage beasts, is easy for him now, but he knew that wasn't enough. He understood that the real danger wasn't just wild beasts, but humans themselves. Only when he truly possesses the ability to face armed personnel will he consider making his escape from this place. We see the pot-bellied man again. He belongs to that private mercenary group known as the Oskins. He remarked that Dr. Wu had truly created the most perfect killing machine in the world. But we must remember, these 2 Indominus Tyrannosaurus Rexes were born at the exact same time. Why is the difference in size so massive? Oskins was, understandably, filled with doubt. The doctor explained that he added BCI genes to their bodies, but for this Indominus Rex, things were different. It seemed the male Indominus Rex possibly had a much higher proportion of BCI genes in his system. Because of this, his growth rate had become significantly faster than his counterpart. Dr. Wu finished his explanation, and to be honest, it sounded like a stroke of genius. Oskins looked even more radiant. These two Indominus Rexes were actually just the first samples grown by the doctor. On the surface, they are meant to be exhibits for Jurassic World. But the true plan behind them is far darker, to utilize these creatures in military warfare. If the Indominus Rex meets expectations, Dr. Wu will implement mass production, creating an entire unit of them. We move to the 10th month after birth, where Jiannen's body length has already exceeded 15 meters. His height increased to 7.5 meters, and his weight tripled to a staggering 20 tons. He has already reached the size of the subadult Indominus Rex that appeared in the movies. Furthermore, all of Jiannen's genetic abilities have been upgraded to level 5, completing his evolution. The bite force from the Tyrannosaurus Rex gene has advanced from level 5 to a reinforced bite. His running speed from the Velociraptor gene has also evolved, moving from level 5 to high speed. He takes a moment to check his data panel. Let's see how Jiannen is doing. Age, 10 months. Race, Indominus Tyrannosaurus Rex. A formidable specimen, to say the least. In comparison, Gray, also 10 months old, is only 7 meters long and 3.5 meters high. She weighs 4 tons, meaning the size difference between her and Jiannen is now 5-fold. And now, the time has almost come for him to make his escape from the cage. Regaining his freedom is the only thing that matters now. There is simply no point in staying here any longer. The first reason for his departure is that resources here have become far too scarce for his needs. The food the humans provide every day is limited, and for a predator of his stature, it is barely a snack. The second reason is that, due to this enclosed environment, he has been a prisoner for far too long. Jiannen has no intention of continuing his life inside this cramped, narrow cage. He wants to drive the humans off this island once and for all, every last one of them, leaving no one behind. Jiannen turned his head toward the sky. He looked at Gray, who was still eating voraciously, and let out a deafening roar. This roar represents the signal, the official beginning of his long-awaited action. In the movie, the Indominus Rex first used its infrared invisibility to block the scanners in the enclosure and then left. Claw marks on the wall, tricking the staff into thinking it had escaped over the top. It was a clever ruse to make them track its whereabouts, only to discover it had been hiding inside the enclosure all along. It never left, and by the time the humans realized their mistake and entered the pen, it was already waiting for them. The Indominus then appeared and blocked the small access door, trapping the security guards inside. They were forced to open the main gate to escape, and the creature finally seized that opportunity to walk right out. However, that plan relied heavily on luck, and Jiannen's escape plan involves far fewer detours. He simply needs to charge straight ahead. After confirming it with his own eyes, he knows this door cannot stop him now. This single strike carries all the humiliation and perseverance of his 10 months in captivity. Not even a miracle could stop him now. Above the glass lookout, Masrani and Claire could not believe their eyes. Was Montfort joking? Had that Indominus Rex actually just smashed through the door and escaped the enclosure? Gray followed right behind him, and just like that, they both escaped from enclosure number 11. Outside the walls, we see an engineering team still busy at work, completely unaware of the danger. The dinosaur has escaped, a sentence no one in this park ever wanted to hear. Terror gripped everyone instantly, and they began running from the site in a desperate, frantic scramble. However, before one worker could even take a few steps, a thick, rigid tail swung out with sudden violence. The man was struck with such force that he was thrown dozens of meters, hitting the ground with a heavy, final thud. To be perfectly honest, Jiannen didn't feel the slightest bit of mercy toward these humans. His steel-like claws, gleaming with a metallic shine, cleanly dispatched another, earning him 2 more gene points for the hunt. Deep down, Jiannen felt these meager gene points were hardly worth more than hunting a common sow. Gray, following closely in his wake, was becoming uncontrollably excited by the chaos. With a sudden leap, he lunged forward, opening his massive jaws to swallow a worker whole. In less than 30 seconds, only ruins remained outside enclosure 11, and the 2 tyrannosaurs had already vanished into the distance. Back on the glass lookout, Masrani and Claire stood as the only stunned witnesses left on the scene. They scrambled to contact the central control room to track the 2 rampaging tyrannosaurs immediately. The order was given to notify the asset containment unit and dispatch an armed team for their capture. Masrani hurriedly insisted, rather optimistically, that the containment team carry only non-lethal weaponry. He made sure to emphasize that they shouldn't be harmed at all, demanding they be brought back alive. Meanwhile, Jiannen moved with firm, powerful strides, leading Gray quickly away from the enclosure 11 area. He released the telepathic perception of his Quetzalcoatlus genes, bringing every movement within a kilometer into clear view. As he walked, Jiannen felt he had finally shed the shackles of his cage and couldn't help but embrace his new freedom. What lies on the other side of the sea? Surely, it must be freedom. Escaping the enclosure, however, was only the first step. Next, the inevitable human pursuit would surely follow. It was time to give these people who call themselves humans a little dinosaur-sized shock. He extended his long forelimbs, moving with a precision that was almost unsettling. He found a specific spot on his left shoulder and suddenly dug his steel claws in with force. Then, a chip no larger than a human thumb appeared in his hand. After that, Jinon also helped Gray remove the tracking chip implanted in his own left shoulder. Even though both he and Gray had successfully removed the devices, Jinon didn't just throw them away. He saw a perfect opportunity to play a little trick on the humans. Inside the Jurassic World Central Control Room, Masrani and Claire arrived in a state of hurried, horrified denial. Using the radio frequency identification chips implanted in the two rampaging tyrannosaurs, they could track their exact location. They were moving rapidly toward the south, or so the screen suggested. The Central Control Room immediately hailed Asset Containment Unit Team 1. The objective of the mission was the two escaped tyrannosaurs currently on the loose. The order was to use only non-lethal weaponry, a command the team acknowledged immediately. The 10-plus armed members of Team 1 responded in unison, ready for the hunt. They quickly equipped their non-lethal gear, boarded two off-road vehicles, and set off at high speed. On the big screen, we see the real-time feed from the containment team as they closed in. Suddenly, they stopped. The chip locations showed that the two rampaging tyrannosaurs had come to a complete halt. Everyone out of the vehicle. Begin the operation. The armed members, having received their orders, quickly disembarked from the car, each clutching their weapons. And so, they cautiously entered the depths of the virgin jungle. The leader of Team 1 was an Asian mercenary, a man who clearly knew his way around a hunt. On his right wrist, he wore a specialized watch equipped with tracking and location software. The group waded through a gently flowing stream, their eyes scanning the dense foliage. The leader noticed that the location displayed on his watch now perfectly overlapped with their current position. But strangely enough, there was no sign of the two rampaging Tyrannosaurus rexes anywhere in the vicinity. Even the thermal detectors failed to pick up any heat signatures or anomalies. How strange. Just as the leader began to wonder what was happening, he suddenly spotted something. He signaled for the members behind him to halt immediately. Two grayish-white stones appeared in the leader's field of vision. But upon closer inspection, he realized they weren't stones at all, but two pieces of flesh covered in gray and white scales. The leader knelt down, picked up one of the pieces where the blood had not yet clotted, and turned it over. There, he saw a radio frequency identification chip still embedded in the meat, its light still blinking. "What is that?" Back at the base, Masrani asked, sounding completely bewildered. "Those are the chips implanted in the bodies of the two escaped Tyrannosaurus rexes." Claire stood there, utterly stunned that they had actually managed to extract the chips themselves. Suddenly, in the middle of the jungle, a single drop of blood fell onto the captain's wrist. The captain looked up, only to see that the leaves above his head had become coated in blood. The dense forest shifted without a breath of wind. And then, in the very next second, in the captain's line of sight, a massive and menacing lizard head revealed its fury from between the treetops. It was followed immediately by the majestic and dominant body of the dragon itself. Quite a surprise, isn't it? Two great dragon kings were now looking down condescendingly at this group of tiny humans. Was this Honshu's plot? They were met with a harsh, cold light. Oh my god, it turns out the creature can actually disguise itself. In that moment, the captain's brain seemed to shut down and restart completely. As soon as the captain's focus wavered, Hienan lunged forward at full speed. The beast opened its blood-stained maw and bit down on the upper half of his body. Just as the captain lost his composure, Hienan charged with terrifying velocity. It opened its bloody mouth and clamped down on his torso, swallowing him in a single, gruesome gulp. And just like that, 3 gene points were earned. In comparison, hunting these armed soldiers, well, the gene points obtained this way were proving to be a bit more plentiful. We see that Hienan had just utilized the illusory camouflage of the squid and tree frog genes. This multi-band genetic stealth allows the creature to remain completely hidden. It seems the effect is quite excellent. Inside the central control room, the captain's vital signs instantly flatlined. Masrani, Claire, and everyone else present were left utterly stunned by what they were seeing. "Attack! Attack!" the other soldiers shouted, though they were clearly paralyzed by shock. The armed men were terrified by the creature's sudden appearance, but to their credit, they reacted quickly. They raised their stun guns and began to fire, hoping to stop the nightmare unfolding before them. However, when the darts struck Hienan's body, that level of electric discharge only made his muscles feel slightly numb. It was no different than a tickle, really. Ignoring the stun guns, Hienan stepped forward and charged boldly toward the team of armed soldiers. Several soldiers who couldn't dodge in time were sent flying through the air by that violent impact. They skidded across a boat and slid in a wide arc before hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Every single part of a Tyrannosaurus rex's body is a lethal weapon, as we are clearly seeing now. In less than 5 minutes, more than a dozen of the soldiers who had attacked were dealt with. Almost every one of them had reached the end of their journey. The last remaining soldier, who had been more cautious, saw that all of his comrades were dead. To be perfectly honest, he was completely terrified. He threw down his weapon and turned around to flee for his life. As it turned out, as soon as he turned, he saw another explosive Tyrannosaurus rex appear before his eyes, though this one was smaller. The creature's form grew larger and larger in the soldier's vision until, finally, its jaws slammed shut. He could no longer see a thing. After dealing with this group of mercenaries, Jinon had accumulated over 50 gene points. he decided to save them for now. Later on, these gene points would serve a much greater purpose. Back in the central control room, the vital signs of one armed staff member after another flattened into straight lines. The silence was so heavy you could have heard a pin drop in the entire place. What should we do now? A staff member asked timidly, breaking the tension. And what about those two explosive Tyrannosaurus Rexes? Currently, the team had completely lost track of their location. Kral looked at Masrani. He ordered the second asset control team to act immediately, equipped with heavy weapons and live ammunition. The order was clear: find every staff member, and, once the tracks of those two explosive Tyrannosaurus Rexes are found, kill them without hesitation. Masrani finally realized he had to abandon these two explosive Tyrannosaurus Rexes, as they were now completely out of control. To prevent any further losses, he decided, with a heavy heart, that the only option left was to eliminate them. Meanwhile, the sunlight gradually filtered through the dense foliage, spilling over the ancient forest as it moved toward the south. Gianna and Gray finally managed to make their way through this thick woods. In the distance, an endless shadow of the prehistoric world began to emerge before them. This is precisely the territory where the herbivorous dinosaurs make their home. As we look out, we see massive brachiosaurids and apatosaurs grazing peacefully. There are herds of triceratops and ankylosaurs covered in thick, natural armor, among many others. And for our explosive Tyrannosaurus Rexes, this place is nothing less than a perfect hunting ground. Although Gianna has already merged many animal genes, he felt that it still wasn't quite enough. He knew there were still deficiencies, and a lack of defensive power was what he lacked most at the moment. To compensate for this weakness, he told himself he must merge even more animal genes to continue strengthening his capabilities. And so, he decided that these herbivores would be his very first targets. Gianna set his sights first on 3 ankylosaurs that were simply walking and feeding nearby. Once the target was locked, his powerful hind legs slammed into the ground, and his massive body shot forward like a projectile. He forced his way through the howling wind, charging directly toward the nearest ankylosaurus. The slow-reacting ankylosaurs only realized the predator was there when the ground began to shake violently, and they tried to flee in a hurry. Gianna pounced on one ankylosaurus that had fallen behind the rest and delivered a crushing blow. He immediately flipped the creature onto its back, exposing the soft abdomen, the one spot without bone protection and the creature's greatest weakness. Gianna unceremoniously opened his massive jaws to deliver a lethal bite. The false dragon, despite its incredible vitality, didn't die of suffocation immediately, but it certainly wasn't going to survive. And Gianna, having secured one kill, didn't stop there. Instead, he turned his attention to the other false dragons. Seeing that he was still pursuing them relentlessly, the 2 remaining creatures stopped running and began to swing their thick, powerful tail clubs, striking out at Gianna's legs with a terrifying whistle through the air. To be honest, the power behind those tail clubs is something that should never be underestimated. A single direct hit could easily result in shattered bones and torn tendons. However, Gianna took full advantage of the agility granted by his velociraptor genes. When he saw the 2 false dragons swinging their tails, he preemptively retreated to avoid the impact. Then, seizing the moment of their failed attack, he repeated his trick, violently slamming one to the ground and lashing out with claws as sharp as steel, tearing through the creature's abdomen as if he were ripping through simple fabric. The last of the false dragons couldn't escape Gianna's clutches either. Eventually, it too left the earth behind, joining its companions in a very orderly defeat. As the creature's breath gradually faded, he successfully completed the hunt, earning himself 150 gene points. The system prompted, would he like to extract the osteoderm genes from the false dragon? Without a moment's hesitation, Gianna chose to confirm the extraction directly. In the very next instant, waves of scorching heat began to erupt from deep within his bones. We can see the skin on the surface of Gianna's body changing visibly right before our eyes. The grayish scale armor covering his body became harder and thicker, taking on a bone-like texture reinforced with a surface layer of keratin. Sharp, bony protrusions also began to grow, looking very much like lethal spikes. The fusion of the false dragon gene was a complete success. As for his accumulated gene points, Gianna added them to the false dragon gene without hesitation, raising the osteoderm armor to level 4 in one go. With that, his hard-earned gene points were finally exhausted. Gianna took a moment to examine his newly upgraded grayish scale armor. Its durability had taken a qualitative leap, becoming much harder than actual bone. A faint, metallic glint began to shimmer across his hide. Once the upgrades were finished, Gianna called out to Gray, who had been following him cheerfully. Together, the 2 of them settled in to enjoy their hard-won meal. After filling their stomachs, Gianna and Gray continued on their way. Instead of resting, he immediately began searching for his next hunting target. He knew he had to use this time to hunt as many creatures as possible before the humans launched their next offensive. He needed more gene points to arm himself. Meanwhile, inside the Dinosaur Gene Research Center, Masrani had already been frantically searching for Dr. Wu. Henry, tell me, he demanded, what kind of monsters are these 2 explosive Tyrannosaurus Rexes that have turned into such beasts? What do you think you're doing? As soon as he laid eyes on Dr. Wu, Masrani got straight to the point with his questioning. You know that I am not authorized to reveal the genetic composition of the Indominus Rex either, don't you? This, as it turns out, is highly confidential information belonging to the International Genetic Technology Corporation. Dr. Wu remained calm, simply sitting back in his office chair. He took a quiet sip of his tea, while Masrani emphasized that people had already been killed. How unfortunate. Dr. Wu simply adjusted his glasses in response to this news. Your research achievements have caused a complete disaster. The board of directors will confiscate your work, and you will also bear the legal responsibility for this. Masrani's tone left absolutely no room for doubt. Dr. Wu smiled, as he was all too familiar with the faces of these capitalists when things turned ugly. In that case, he told himself, it was time to prepare for a quick escape. We move now to Jurassic World North, the zone for direct lineage dinosaurs. Many of the dinosaurs in the park are in a state of total chaos, all emitting cries of pure terror. And all of this, naturally, is because two gods of death have broken into the park. The Indominus Rex, that sound, like a death sentence, echoed through the air once again. A group of brachiosaurs, hearing the noise, realized the danger and moved their heavy, clumsy bodies to flee in terror. One adult brachiosaur that fell behind had no choice but to stop and turn to face the two of them. The fierce and terrifying Indominus Rexes were closing in. Imagine the scene, a brachiosaur 25 meters long and 15 meters high. It stands as tall as a 5-story building, with a weight exceeding 50 tons. It is significantly larger than these two Indominus Rexes. But in the end, it is merely a dinosaur of direct lineage, nothing more. And off they go. Facing a brachiosaurus significantly larger than himself, John didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. His hind limbs pushed off with such force that they shattered the ground beneath him. He unleashed lightning-fast speed and charged directly toward the massive brachiosaur. Gray, for her part, wasn't about to just stand there and watch. She lunged quickly toward the brachiosaur from the side, supporting Jiannen's offensive. And then, Jiannen's blood-stained maw swung wide open. He aimed directly for the brachiosaur's long, thick neck and clamped down with a sudden snap. As he bit down, the power of his Tyrannosaurus Rex gene enhancement took over. His bite force exploded instantly, with devastating results. In a single mouthful, the skin and flesh of the brachiosaur's neck were exposed. The creature's hide was easily pierced by those steel-like teeth, as if it were nothing at all. Combined with 5 times his usual bite strength, he snapped the cervical vertebrae clean through. The dragon's entire massive body hit the ground with a thunderous crash that shook the earth. John continued his work to finish the job, precisely driving his steel claws into the brachiosaur's carotid artery. Not long after, the brachiosaur succumbed to the massive blood loss from its body. As the blood pooled, we see that he has successfully hunted a brachiosaur, earning 300 gene points. The question now was whether he would extract the brachiosaur's gene for gigantism. John felt a surge of excitement, knowing the brachiosaur's genetic ability would be incredibly useful. To him, being large meant being strong, and being strong was the ultimate form of beauty. He wondered, perhaps a bit ambitiously, when he might finally become as large as King Kong. Even Godzilla would be great, he thought, as he proceeded with the extraction of the brachiosaur gene. The look on Jiannen's face even began to worry Gray a little as she stood by his side. It hurts too much. A low, uncontrollable sound escaped from the corner of his mouth. This display worried Gray, who was standing right by his side, as a low sound escaped from the corner of his mouth. She was clearly wondering about his current situation and what exactly was happening inside his body. Deep within him, countless cellular tissues were proliferating and dividing at an incredible rate. The muscles and bones throughout his entire body began to stretch and grow before our very eyes. In a very short time, Jiannen's size expanded as if he were a sponge soaking up water. There were significant changes, and his entire physical structure was scaling up proportionally. His length increased to 10 meters, and his body weight more than doubled in the process. He shot up to 50 tons, waiting patiently until the burning sensation in his body finally began to fade. It took 2 full days before John let out a satisfied sound, feeling a level of power he had never known before. He felt a surging strength fill his body, and so, he decided to open his data panel. The current John had already reached 20 meters in length, and his weight had hit a staggering 50 tons. Gray, staying close by, witnessed his massive growth with her own eyes in such a short period of time. To be honest, such a rapid expansion and increase in mass was truly astonishing to behold. He told her that in the future, she should just stick close to her big brother for protection. John gave her a few gentle pats on the head to comfort her. Gray was his only family now, his kin in this strange world, one might say. Because of that, John valued her deeply. Meanwhile, we moved to the central area of the logic world. This is the hub where the resorts and various commercial facilities are all concentrated. More than 20,000 tourists who had quietly returned from the North Park were gathered here. The tourists, however, had no idea what had actually happened. Complaints are pouring in from every corner regarding the park's recent actions. Back in the control room, Masrani and Claire have returned to reorganize the general situation. and we see that the second asset management team has already departed in their off-road vehicles. This time, every single one of them is equipped with the latest thermal imaging technology. They've been found. The two violent Tyrannosaurus Rex are currently located in the Strait Dinosaur Park. The western valley of the southern gyrosphere is dangerously close to the pterosaur pavilion. A staff member reported this news loudly to the rest of the room. Notify the second asset management team immediately, Masrani said with visible urgency. Just at that moment, the elevator doors slid open and a burly man walked in. It was Hoskins. What are you doing here? Masrani asked, his brow furrowed in clear annoyance. I'm here to help, of course. This is the perfect chance to use velociraptors in actual combat. Using them to fight two Indominus Rex? That was the bold proposal Hoskins put forward. Masrani shook his head without a second thought, asking what he intended to do about the tourists. There are over 20,000 people here with nowhere to run, Hoskins countered. I will handle this myself, he insisted, promising not to let anything happen to a single tourist. Masrani gave Hoskins a long, deep look before finally issuing a decisive order. Prepare a helicopter and mount the Remington 3-4 machine gun from the armory. This time, he was determined not to let those two Indominus Rex escape again. Everyone present was stunned, as they hadn't expected Boss Masrani to take such direct action. Meanwhile, Kianan and Gray continued their journey, heading further toward the south. They arrived at the Gyrosphere Valley, the most famous attraction in Jurassic World, where tourists can travel in spheres to explore and get close to the gentle herbivores. But now, due to the emergency, the gyrospheres have stopped running, and the peace and beauty of this area have been completely shattered. With the bodies of herbivorous dinosaurs scattered everywhere, a truly grim sight to behold. As a result of his recent efforts, the armor covering Keenan's body underwent yet another transformation. Its color shifted to a silvery white with a distinct metallic texture, and the texture itself was now comparable to that of a specialized steel plate. Furthermore, Keenan hunted Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and other herbivores, extracting new genes from them to add to his arsenal. He gained bony horns from the Triceratops gene and dorsal spikes from the Stegosaurus gene, equipping himself for what was to come. Naturally, the power of Keenan's head and tail, whether using a headbutt or a whip-like strike, was now enhanced with the piercing capability of those horns and spikes. Just at that moment, the sudden roar of engines could be heard echoing in the distance. Through his psychic induction, Keenan discovered that two more off-road vehicles were heading rapidly toward their position. The human pursuers were back. Keenan knew that this time, the humans must be taking things very seriously. The danger was extremely high, and he realized this was not a situation to be taken lightly. Keenan immediately signaled to Gray and led him back into the dense woods, using the mirage camouflage of the pseudoscorpion gene and the multi-band camouflage of the tree frog to set up an ambush. Shortly after, the roar of the two off-road vehicles grew louder as they approached the area. We see that in the passenger seat of the leading vehicle, a new player has entered the field. The leader of the second asset management team, a burly man, was holding an advanced radar life detector. Suddenly, the radar life detector emitted a sharp warning sound. A clear red dot immediately appeared on the screen, signaling a target. At 3 o'clock, the captain gave the order immediately, and the hunt was on once again. However, we see that the captain was still feeling a bit perplexed by the situation. Why was there only one target nearby? Suddenly, a terrifying shock came from behind them. When the captain turned around to look, he could hardly believe his own eyes. The second off-road vehicle right behind him was suddenly lifted high into the air. The moment it landed, a massive horn like a celestial pillar stomped down, crushing the car into a metal pancake. Good God, it wasn't until the captain looked up that he saw the owner of that horn, a giant blocking out the sky. Seeing it with his own eyes, the captain realized this male Tyrannosaurus Rex was twice as large as the data suggested. Even the radar life detector had failed to pick up the presence of this massive predator. Could it be that he can even block electromagnetic radar waves? To be honest, that shouldn't be possible. We returned to the control room, where Claire and the others were watching the real-time feed from the second team. The familiar, silent sound of dripping echoed over and over again in the quiet room. Claire and her colleagues turned pale with fright as they watched the images reappear like ghosts on the screen. In reality, he still possesses the ability to remain invisible to radar. I'm not mistaken, am I? His size seems to have increased significantly all of a sudden. He has also grown dorsal spines, and those spikes on his tail are new as well. My God, could it be that he has been constantly evolving this entire time? Facing Kianan, they truly felt as though their entire understanding of the world had been shattered. Fire! Open fire! Out on the savannah, the chaos was only beginning. Although the captain was shocked, he reacted quickly and shouted out his orders. As soon as the words left his mouth, the team members in the vehicle raised their submachine guns and rifles. The cold barrels of the weapons began spitting out continuous tongues of fire. Countless bullets formed a storm of metal, all aimed directly at the male Tyrannosaurus. They were unloading frantically, yet the scene everyone expected, the beast being riddled with holes, simply didn't happen. Clang, clang, clang. The bullets struck the Tyrannosaurus Rex's body, but they emitted a deafening sound of metal clashing against metal. Intense sparks flew everywhere. How could this even be possible? It was a terrifying sight, one that completely surpassed the understanding of everyone present. Turn around. Quick drive. Quick drive. The team member behind the wheel of the off-road vehicle slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The engine's power was pushed to the absolute limit as they tried to escape desperately. But Gianna's explosive speed was far faster than the startup of any off-road vehicle. And so, the distance between the two of them began to shrink more and more. Roaring with determination, Captain Negro was still somewhat reluctant to give up, wielding a sniper rifle. He aimed directly at the creature's head and suddenly pulled the trigger. Under the dazzling muzzle flash, the sniper bullet went flying from the barrel. In the blink of an eye, it struck Gianna's head with incredible force. The bullet, capable of piercing steel plates 20 millimeters thick, simply got stuck when it hit the Tyrannosaurus Rex's scales. It only left a tiny crater-like wound. Not bad, really. At least he managed to scratch the skin a little. The Tyrannosaurus Rex let out a roar that sounded like an ancient, evil dragon. In the very next second, Gianna had already closed the gap on these terrified humans. Quick, jump out of the car, Captain Negro shouted again, opening the door and leaping from the vehicle. But the rest of the team members were just a fraction of a second too slow. It was in that tiny window of time that Gianna delivered a powerful kick, sending the entire off-road vehicle flying. The car's body spun through the air and slammed into the ground roof first with a dull, heavy thud. The entire frame of the vehicle was completely deformed by the impact. Meanwhile, Captain Negro, who had managed to leap out just in time, rolled several times across the hard ground. He fell so hard it felt as though every bone in his body had been shattered. With a desperate effort, he somehow managed to pull himself back up to his feet. But just as Captain Negro stood up, he found a lizard-like head several times larger than his own, only inches away. That blood-stained mouth opened slightly, forming what could only be described as a cruel smile. This was no Mona Lisa smile. It was the cold, predatory gaze of the devil itself. Captain Negro let out a scream, but in the very next second, his cry was cut abruptly short. There on the ground, Captain Negro had screamed his last. And just like that, the sound of his voice vanished into the air. All that remained on the earth were a few scattered drops of blood. Finally, the Tyrannosaurus Rex turned her gaze toward the overturned vehicle lying with its wheels in the air. Sensing there were humans inside who hadn't died yet, she simply stomped on it to finish the job. And so, we see the fate of Asset Containment Team 2. They were completely annihilated. Meanwhile, back inside the Jurassic World control room, the monitors showed the vital signs of every single member of Team 2 disappearing one by one. Claire and the others stood there in total silence, unable to utter a single word. That genetic Tyrannosaurus Rex was, quite simply, a monster. With the conventional armed forces they had at their disposal, they were no match for her. Now, their only hope lies with Miss Ronnie, who is personally piloting a helicopter to join the fight. Meanwhile, the death toll continued to update on the control panel. This allowed Gianna to obtain more than 30 gene points once again. But to be honest, the profitability of hunting these humans remains far too low. Such a small amount of gene points isn't even enough for Gianna to get her teeth into. Once the battle ended, Gianna let out a cry, signaling for Gray, who had been hiding, to come out. After all, she isn't quite like Gianna. If she were hit by bullets from those firearms, she would surely be in mortal danger. Because of that, Gianna had kept Gray hidden the entire time without showing herself. Gray approached Gianna, carefully checking to see if she had been wounded. Eventually, she discovered the bullet lodged in the artificial neck of Gianna's head. Gray let out a roar, prompting Gianna to lower her head so she could use her claws to help remove the stuck bullet. She pulled it out gently and even extended her tongue to softly lick the wound. She seemed to be saying it was all right, that she wasn't really hurt and had only lost a little blood. Gianna couldn't help but feel a bit amused by the gesture. The wound caused by the sniper's bullet hadn't actually drawn much blood at all, but Gray left quite a mess of saliva behind. Just then, Gianna suddenly heard the sound of air rushing from a spinning propeller and looked around. What caught her eye was a helicopter heading steadily toward their position. We see that the open door of the aircraft had an M134 heavy machine gun installed and ready for action. This was not good, and Gianna felt a sudden surge of tension in her heart. She immediately roared at Gray to leave first, intending to draw the helicopter's attention toward herself. Gray also realized the danger and clearly didn't want her companion to take such a risk alone. But under Gianna's stern roar, she was forced to turn and hide in the dense Shergo forest, while Gianna chose a different direction. She set off quickly, aiming for the pterosaur pavilion at the edge of the forest, hundreds of meters away. After all, Gianna has no air-to-air combat capabilities at the moment, leaving her to face the helicopter's fire quite passively. In that case, we can hardly blame her for seeking a little outside help. The target was detected at the 10 o'clock position. At the same time, Masrani was the one responsible for piloting the helicopter. Beside him were two armed men, and the heavy machine gun suddenly opened fire, spitting out a deafening rain of bullets. Innumerable large-caliber rounds chased the Tyrannosaurus Rex along her path. Although the complex terrain and Gianna's high speed avoided most of the shots, many bullets still struck her body. emitting the continuous, unmistakable sound of metal clashing against metal. Yes, even with so many hits, the impact only produced that strange metallic ringing. How was this possible? Was the body of this brutal Tyrannosaurus Rex actually made of iron? This sight left the three men in the helicopter completely stunned. Suddenly, a massive circular glass building not far away caught Miss Ronnie's attention. That was the Pterosaur Pavilion, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex smashed right into it, her powerful force shattering a huge hole in the tempered glass. The glass shattered into a million pieces across the floor, and our story takes a turn into the skies. No. Miss Ronnie's expression changed instantly as he witnessed this scene. If the pterosaurs in the pavilion were to escape, not only would his helicopter be in danger, but the tourists stranded in Jurassic World would face a total disaster. We see that Gianna has just broken into the pterodactyl aviary. The pterodactyls inside erupted in chaos. Faced with such a massive and terrifying creature, they all let out shrieks of pure terror. This place is primarily home to medium and small pterodactyls, such as the pteranodon and dimorphodon. The total number of pterodactyls in the entire pavilion is at least 400 or 500. Gianna let out a roar that resonated through the structure, much like a thunderclap. She opened her massive jaws and snapped up a pteranodon perched on a rock garden with lightning speed. Even if the pteranodon had wanted to break free, it was already far too late. The Tyrannosaurus bit down precisely on its neck, which, to her, was no thicker than a toothpick. Its cervical vertebrae were shattered into pieces in a single instant. Then, Gianna casually finished off the pteranodon as if it were a small snack. Hunting a pteranodon grants 30 gene points. And here we learn that the pterodactyl gene can be extracted to allow for flight with dragon wings. Extracting the ability to fly. Gianna was pleasantly surprised by this revelation. Fusing the pterodactyl gene would allow her to develop wings and take to the skies. But she told herself that now was not the time to begin fusing genes. It would be better to wait until she dealt with her human pursuers and found a safe environment before attempting the fusion. Next, the Tyrannosaurus began a merciless slaughter within the pterodactyl pavilion. The pterodactyls in the pavilion flew up in a panic, escaping through the jagged openings in the shattered tempered glass. The three men inside the helicopter were stunned to see a massive swarm of pterodactyls emerging, and they quickly tried to gain altitude. They wanted to get far away from the group, but the pterodactyls weren't about to let fresh prey inside a helicopter just fly away. Suddenly, a pteranodon slammed into the helicopter, sending a violent shudder through the entire fuselage. The armed staff member operating the heavy machine gun at the cabin door stumbled, losing his footing completely. He tumbled from the cabin, clinging desperately to the door to avoid the fall, but a second later, another pteranodon swooped in and snatched him away. And this, as it turns out, was only the beginning, as more and more pterodactyls began to gather around them. The man was forcibly dragged into the sky, and we see that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The swarm attacked the helicopter frantically until the rotor blades shattered under the violent impact and the aircraft began to fail. With a mechanical roar, the entire helicopter fell from the sky like a broken kite, crashing directly back into the pterodactyl pavilion. The fuselage exploded violently. Miss Ronnie and his co-pilot were killed instantly, their bodies lost in the wreckage. It was over. In the Jurassic World control room, Claire and the others watched the scene unfold, turning pale with absolute despair. She realized they had to act fast, ordering an immediate broadcast to evacuate every single tourist on the island. Claire, finally reacting to the horror, shouted her instructions in a desperate rush. Only one face in the room revealed a suppressed, knowing smile amidst the chaos. It was Hoskins. With Miss Ronnie gone, there was no one left to stop him from implementing his own dark plans. Meanwhile, at the Jurassic World Resort, over 20,000 tourists were gathered, completely unaware of the danger. Suddenly, an emergency alert informed them that due to control anomalies, everyone had to seek shelter immediately. A series of urgent announcements rang out abruptly across the park speakers. The tourists hadn't even processed the warning when they heard a chorus of sharp, piercing shrieks coming from the distant sky. They looked up toward the sound, only to see a vast number of pterodactyls descending upon them with bared claws and teeth. Pterodactyls? Why on earth were so many pterodactyls suddenly flying free? The scene immediately devolved into absolute, terrifying chaos. Our flying predators were, quite obviously, far faster than the panicked crowds below. One particularly large, toothless pteranodon went into a direct, high-speed dive. It began snatching tourists off the ground as if it were merely picking up dolls. In a very short amount of time, many of the visitors were badly injured. Blood began to stain the pavement, and we see the situation becoming truly desperate. At that moment, a four-wheeled motorcycle appeared, heading straight into the fray. The rider didn't hesitate for a second, raising his tranquilizer gun and firing at the rampaging pterodactyls. And who is this? It is Oven, the man at the heart of our Jurassic World story. He had been training his raptors as usual when news of the emergency reached him, prompting him to investigate. To be honest, he certainly didn't expect to be greeted by a swarm of flying reptiles the moment he arrived. With the arrival of more security personnel, they finally managed to get a grip on the resort's chaotic state. Most of the pterodactyls had been hit by tranquilizer darts and were being brought under control. However, a small number of the creatures managed to make their escape. With their wings, they were now capable of flying far beyond the borders of Isla Nublar. And once they reach the human world, well, things will become very dangerous indeed. Without anyone really noticing, the sky had already begun to grow dark. Oven, still largely unaware of the full scale of the disaster, arrived anxiously at the central control room. Just as he reached the doors, he ran straight into Hoskins, who was accompanied by a group of heavily armed mercenaries. They had taken complete control of the entire central command center. Following Misrani's sacrifice, Hoskins spoke to Oven with a thin, false smile. What is happening? Why did the pterodactyls escape from their enclosure? Oven asked, only to realize he still had no idea what had actually transpired. Then let me tell you, Hoskins replied, before explaining the details of the situation. He told Oven how the two Indominus Rex had escaped, which left him completely stunned. I have a battle plan now, and I'm going to need your cooperation. I need your trained velociraptors to hunt down the two Indominus Rex that are on the loose. And so, finally, Hoskins slowly revealed his true intentions. Don't even think about it. Impossible. Hearing this, Oven refused without a second thought. He knew perfectly well that Hoskins had always pinned high hopes on the velociraptors he had trained. Hoskins had always, yes, always, placed far too much confidence in those trained raptors. Not to mention, the two Indominus Rex were simply no match for a mere 4 velociraptors. Furthermore, his velociraptor training had never actually been put into practice. Once those velociraptors regained their freedom and spiraled out of control, the consequences would be unimaginable. I'm not negotiating with you, Hoskins countered. I'm in charge here now. My men have already left for the raptor paddock to prepare for action. The result, he made clear, would be the same with or without Oven's help. Hoskins spoke with an undeniable tone, and finally, for the safety of the remaining tourists, Oven had to agree. Hoskins' operational plan promised that he would personally lead the velociraptors to hunt down the two Indominus Rex. He would have to cooperate with Hoskins' small private army to hunt them down. Meanwhile, we see that every single pterodactyl in the aviary had escaped through the breach. The remains of the crashed helicopter were still burning with a terrifying fury. As for Heenan, the source of all this chaos, he had already left the aviary and returned to the ancient forest to find a hiding place. It was time to fuse the pterodactyl gene, and with a single thought, he immediately began the process. That familiar burning sensation returned, spreading through every muscle and bone in Heenan's body. The pain was agonizing, and suddenly, an unbearable sound of cracking bone came from the ribs on both sides of his chest. Two thick, tubular bones slowly pierced through the skin and scales on his flanks. The pain was so immense that Heenan couldn't help but let out a thunderous roar. These two symmetrical tubular bones were hollow structures, growing and stretching wildly like bamboo shoots after a rain. They continued to expand until they reached a length of 30 meters each. Only then did the growth finally slow down and come to a complete halt. When fully extended, the pair of wing bones added up to something truly staggering. A wingspan of 60 meters, and yet, the fusion of the pterodactyl gene was still continuing. Once the general structure of the wing bones had finally formed, a membrane slowly began to spread across them, and at last, the entire gene fusion drew to a close. The pain also began to fade away gradually, leaving him in peace. Heenan couldn't wait to reach a nearby stream to see his new reflection in the water. In a word, he looked magnificent. The entire pair of wings looked perfectly natural. It was as if they were innate, and after fusing the gene, he had truly grown the wings he desired. He had finally gained the ability to fly. However, the specific mechanics of his flight would have to be tested personally to be certain. Heenan let out a roar filled with vigorous energy, his eyes fixed on the distant sky. There they were, a pair of silver dragon wings, looking both dominant and wild. Fully extended, the dragon's proud body looked as though it were ready to leap into the heavens at any moment. Heenan was incredibly anxious to finally beat those massive dragon wings. Torrential currents of air began to surge from beneath his wings. And then, those currents transformed into a sudden, powerful gust of wind. He felt his body becoming lighter, and a second later, Heenan's thick, powerful hind limbs exerted sudden force, easily crushing the ground beneath him. Leaving 2 deep footprints behind, the dragon's enormous body leaped with extraordinary agility, steadily gaining altitude. He headed straight for the clouds. To be honest, it was a sight to behold. He was actually flying. He lowered his head and saw that he was getting further and further away from the solid ground. We see him soaring over the towering trees, his expression unable to hide his sheer excitement. At first, his speed was quite high, but as Heenan adapted to the sensation of flight, he steadily increased the frequency of his wing beats. Naturally, his flight speed continued to climb higher and higher. Soon, while gliding through the air, Heenan spotted a familiar figure on the ground. It was Gray, who had been separated from him earlier. Heenan immediately called out to Gray, and upon hearing the familiar roar of his older brother, Gray quickly responded. As the solid wings created a massive storm of dust and flying rocks, Gray finally managed to see him clearly. It turned out to be quite a shock for the little one. Gray approached his older brother, and soon, Heenan landed safely. The pair of open dragon wings folded and connected quickly, like a closing umbrella, tucking against his broad back. As soon as he landed, Gray began to walk around Heenan's new wings, clearly very curious about the change. Heenan gently patted Gray's head, let out a soft roar, and continued leading him toward the south. Their objective was clear. They were heading straight for the central area of the Jurassic world. After dusk, the night had already fallen silently over the landscape. We move now to enclosure number 3, the Velociraptor paddock managed by Owen. Owen had recovered the blood used to dig out the ID chips, and he smeared it on the 4 raptors so they would remember the scent. They were tracking the explosive Tyrannosaurus Rex, and in no time at all, everyone was ready for the hunt. Owen mounted his 4-wheeled motorcycle while the mercenary team boarded an armored vehicle, splitting into 2 groups. Release the Velociraptors. As soon as Owen gave the word, the iron gates of enclosure 3 swung wide open. The 4 Velociraptors, led by Blue, shot out of the enclosure like a bolt of lightning. Owen's motorcycle and the mercenaries' armored vehicle followed closely behind them through the brush. To be honest, this was the very first time these Velociraptors had seen the outside world since they were born. They were finally letting their nature as high-speed hunters be completely unleashed. After more than 10 minutes, the raptors suddenly seemed to catch a scent and began to slow their pace. They had picked up the trail of the explosive Tyrannosaurus Rex. Owen immediately contacted the mercenaries in the rear, using his communicator to signal the change. Soon after, the Velociraptors came to a complete halt in the darkness. Owen and the armed mercenaries quickly climbed down from their vehicles and began to advance with extreme caution. Silence. A deathly, heavy silence filled the air around them. Including Owen, everyone there felt a cold sweat breaking out on their foreheads, and who could blame them, really? At that moment, from the trees just a short distance ahead, they heard the sound of faint rustling. Immediately after, under the cover of night, a massive black shadow emerged from the darkness. Right before the eyes of our 4 Velociraptors, the Indominus Rex finally made its appearance. There it stood, and they could finally see the true scale of the Indominus Rex with their own eyes. Owen and the others suddenly realized just how enormous the creature's size truly was. Compared to it, the 4 raptors and the humans were like tiny mice standing before an elephant. The one who had arrived, naturally, was John Nan. Using his psychic perception, he had already detected the squad of velociraptors nearby. After spotting the human figures as well, he took the initiative to go out and meet them. We mustn't forget that Jiannen's body contains velociraptor genes. This means, quite simply, that he can communicate with them without any trouble at all. There are no barriers between them, and these velociraptors are, as we know, highly intelligent. They possess a pack instinct, much like wolves who will always obey the strongest alpha. He told them that their real enemies should be those spoiled creatures, the humans who raised them. He conveyed this meaning clearly through his low roars. Dinosaurs, he insisted, will never be slaves. After understanding his words, the 4 raptors turned their heads in unison and fixed their eyes on the humans behind them. And just like that, the situation on the battlefield changed completely. He realized they were cursed. It was no wonder those people always refused to reveal the Indominus Rex's fused genome. It turns out they also have velociraptor genes hidden within their bodies. Only then did Owen realize the gravity of the mistake they had made. A cold shiver ran straight down Owen's spine as he watched the scene unfold. What are you waiting for? Open fire. Kill it. At that same moment, a furious Hoskins began shouting orders in a desperate rush. The fully armed mercenaries didn't hesitate, pulling their triggers one after another. The various weapons in their hands frantically unleashed a hail of bullets toward John Nan. However, without exception, the bullets simply erupted into showers of sparks as they struck the creature's armor. They emitted a sharp, metallic clanging sound, as if hitting solid iron. Immediately after, one of the mercenaries stepped forward, shoulder to shoulder with his team. He was carrying a rocket launcher and fired a projectile directly at John Nan. And here, we see a scene that absolutely no one could have expected. The massive creature suddenly leaped high into the air with surprising grace. A pair of limbs suddenly unfurled from its sides, which, naturally, shouldn't have been there. With those incomparably enormous wings, the dragon's entire body rose into the sky. As the wings beat, a fierce wind pressure swept through the area, forming a howling whirlwind. Trees were knocked down all around, and the people present lost control of their footing, tossed into the air. The rocket struck the spot where John Nan had been standing just a moment before, causing a violent explosion. It set a large area of trees ablaze, but it failed to cause him even the slightest bit of damage. Yes, it seemed impossible. The creature could actually fly. Back in the central control room, Hoskins stood in complete shock, staring at the images being transmitted in real time. Retreating quickly, Owen barely managed to stabilize himself and find his footing. He rushed to shout at Hoskins' mercenaries, who had been knocked down and were now scattered across the ground. Their enemies were now completely disorganized, not just that abnormal, leopard-like Tyrannosaurus, but also 4 velociraptors that had finally revealed themselves. He had barely finished speaking when a mercenary, just as he was getting up, was slammed back down by a raptor's razor-sharp teeth. The creature began biting into him savagely, and the man's miserable screams filled the air. The other mercenaries remaining on the scene were terrified, firing their weapons frantically into the surrounding darkness. With the velociraptors moving like the wind, muffled moans, screams, and roars echoed through the dark forest for a long time. Owen could no longer worry about the others. He turned his head and ran toward his four-wheeled motorcycle. His only thought was to retreat, but in the very next moment, that massive and all-too-familiar figure appeared. It descended from the sky, crushing the four-wheeler as if it were nothing more than a cheap toy. The creature even snatched Owen up with one hand, holding him like a small action figure. "Hello there. In your next life, try to reincarnate as Star-Lord again." John Nan smiled at Owen, baring his teeth, and right before the man's utterly terrified eyes, he opened his maw and devoured him. "Sorry, but who told you that you were the one? The male protagonist of this Divine Logic World series? Hardly." And so, John Nan felt he had to deal with Owen first to ensure his plan stayed on track. This way, the four velociraptors would no longer have any reason to rebel against him. Next, John Nan took to the air once more, lunging toward the remaining mercenaries. He began killing them one by one, picking them off as easily as if they were tiny ants. The entire mercenary team and the patrol were completely wiped out in a matter of moments. Finally, the four well-fed velociraptors gathered around John Nan, their new master. Evidently, they were planning to follow John Nan from that moment on. John Nan let out a roar toward them, signaling his clear approval. As the saying goes, fighting alone simply has no future. One must unite all the forces that can possibly be united. And right then, we see Gray appearing from behind as well. He also possessed velociraptor genes and took a moment to exchange a few words with the pack. Since Gray's size and strength far exceeded theirs, the others had no choice but to yield the second-in-command spot. Looking at them now, why does it feel like we're watching a band of small-time thugs? Watching Gray and the Raptors together, John Nan couldn't help but feel a bit amused by the sight. But these aren't fake bandits. They are a true league of vengeance. The targets of their wrath are the very humans who have been imprisoning and managing them all this time. Dinosaurs, it seems, were never meant to be slaves. In the end, they would be kings, or so John Nan proclaimed with another roar. Leading Gray and the velociraptors, he quickly guided them away from that blood-stained clearing. After cutting through the dense forest, they finally reached the central core of Jurassic World. The humans had been hunting them for what felt like an eternity. Now, it was their turn to strike back. Meanwhile, in the control room, Hoskins' expression was incredibly grim. The veins on his forehead were twitching violently every few seconds. He had been certain this was a foolproof operation, yet it had ended in a total disaster. To be honest, the Indominus Rex had proven itself to be an excellent military biological weapon, just not for him. It was a real shame, of course, that there was no longer any possibility of success. His best option now was to flee with the first priority. Hoskins pulled out his mobile phone and quickly dialed the number for Dr. Wu. "Dr. Wu, the plan has changed. The mission has gone completely off the rails. Take all the research results immediately and get out of there. Let's get out of this cursed place quickly," Hoskins said with a desperate urgency. Dr. Wu understood the situation perfectly and had no choice but to agree. Hoskins and the remaining mercenaries boarded a helicopter and rushed to pick up Dr. Wu. Just as the helicopter was taking off, a deafening roar echoed like thunder through the night not far away. Immediately, Hoskins, Dr. Wu, and the mercenaries on board turned pale with absolute terror. It was that Indominus Rex again. This was death in the truest sense of the word. Yes, it was definitely that Indominus Rex once more. To be honest, they were staring directly into the face of their own demise. Impossible, absolutely impossible. How could it possibly fly? And its size had become truly massive. Dr. Wu recognized it immediately. After all, it was the Indominus Rex he had created himself. No one knew the creature better than Dr. Wu, since the Indominus genome formed its entire genetic makeup. Even though it possessed 11 different types of animal genes, none of them should have allowed it to grow such things. A pair of wings like an Iosaurus, head spines and legs like a Triceratops, or tail spikes like a Nodosaurus were simply not in the blueprints. Even its body had surged drastically in size, reaching the proportions one would only expect from a 10,000-year-old dragon. How could this have happened? Had the Indominus Rex genome mutated, or was it capable of constant evolution? Dr. Wu was in complete disbelief, wondering what kind of terrifying monster he had unintentionally created. "It's flying right toward us. Fire! Rapid fire!" Hoskins screamed in pure horror from the doorway of the helicopter cabin. A mercenary manning a heavy machine gun opened fire with a fierce, desperate expression. However, the creature didn't even need to dodge. Enduring the rain of bullets, it flew silently toward the helicopter. The helicopter, having only just taken off, simply hadn't had enough time to pick up speed. Before it could escape, the aircraft, with a fuselage over 10 meters long, looked fragile against that rapidly expanding, massive figure. No. Hoskins and Dr. Wu were so utterly terrified that they completely lost their voices. But in the very next instant, the creature had already clamped its jaws onto the helicopter's tail. The tough alloy structure of the fuselage snapped under that terrifying bite force and those giant, steel-like teeth. The machine instantly lost its balance and plummeted toward the ground. Fortunately, the flight altitude wasn't very high, though it still slammed into the earth, scattering scrap metal everywhere. The people inside managed to survive the impact, and just as Dr. Wu breathed a sigh of relief and tried to flee the wreckage, that terrifying figure, like a god of death, landed on the ground. The gale force wind, kicked up by the giant dragon, nearly blew all those insignificant humans away. The Dragonhawk King suddenly extended a pair of giant, sickle-shaped claws and easily tore through the helicopter's outer hull. And just like that, everyone inside the cabin was left completely exposed to the creature's gaze. Several mercenaries tasked with protecting Hoskins still tried to resist with their weapons. They were immediately swept away by the Dragonhawk King's massive club-like tail and crushed into pulp. Hoskins let out a hysterical scream, dragging his round belly out of the helicopter in a desperate attempt to escape Heenan's reach. The Dragonhawk King suddenly struck with his dragon palm, completely covering the area where Hoskins was struggling. When he lifted his palm again, Hoskins had been reduced to nothing more than a footprint in a deep pit. In the end, only Dr. Wu remained, paralyzed on the ground and not daring to move a muscle. We see Dr. Wu staring up at the Dragonhawk King, standing before him on the earth. He was so close now, his face was deathly pale and his lips were trembling. He couldn't utter a single word, realizing that the Dragonhawk King had deliberately left him for last. This, quite clearly, shows that the creature recognized him. Only then did Heenan extend those giant sickle-shaped claws again, using 2 fingers to lift the defenseless Dr. Wu. Heenan didn't stop until they were both held at the exact same eye level. It was in that very moment that Dr. Wu saw something terrifying. He watched as the creature's mouth curled upward, mocking his own academic reputation. It revealed, from the very depths of its being, an extreme sense of cruelty and malice. To Heenan, the man dangling before him was more than just familiar. The very first person he saw when he transmigrated was Dr. Wu. As an Indominus Rex, he is a transgenic organism and has no parents, not in the traditional sense. The person who actually created him was none other than Dr. Wu himself. And because of that, Heenan felt he should thank him properly, in his own way, of course. The Indominus Rex applied only a tiny fraction of strength with his finger. He squeezed Dr. Wu's neck with a firm, crushing grip. The bone snapped easily, leaving the doctor's eyes wide and staring into the surrounding fire. Dr. Wu died instantly, his pupils dilated and the life completely drained from him. Soon, all sound faded away, and much like Hoskins, Dr. Wu's face was frozen in an expression of absolute, lingering shock. He simply couldn't believe his fate was to die at the hands of his own creation. After tossing the body aside, Heenan was about to leave when he felt the ground tremble violently, as if a massive creature were approaching. Through his universal perception, he quickly realized that a large-scale predator had been released somewhere nearby. It was closing in on his location, and leading the way was a woman holding a bright flare. She was running at full speed, remarkably enough, while wearing high heels. We returned to a half-hour earlier, just as Hoskins realized his plan had utterly failed. He had quickly led his subordinates away, fleeing the central control room in a panic. The rest of the staff scattered in the face of the disaster, leaving Claire as the only person left in the entire facility. She didn't leave, knowing that if she fled too, there would be no one left to stop the rampaging Indominus Rex. And to stop him, Claire could only think of one truly bold and desperate idea. She would use a dinosaur to fight a dinosaur, a classic solution, really. Jurassic World currently has 11 large enclosures for fierce carnivores, and enclosure number 9 houses a very specific predator. While the park around it changes, the resident of enclosure 9 remains a constant force. This particular T-Rex is, quite literally, the true protagonist of the entire Jurassic saga. The Queen of Isla Nublar, known as Rexy, was summoned by Claire to deal with this Indominus Rex that kills as if it were nothing. Rexy, guided here by Claire, spotted Heenan immediately and let out a deafening, earth-shaking roar. Not to be outdone, Heenan roared back, standing 20 meters long and weighing over 50 tons. He was much larger and stronger than Rexy, yet despite the massive size difference, she showed no fear or hesitation. She attacked first, taking a decisive step and charging directly toward Heenan with everything she had. As she opened her bloody jaws to bite his neck, Heenan counterattacked, meeting her head-on in a brutal clash. The sound of their collision was like a thunderclap exploding across the facility. An invisible shockwave spread out, causing the ground beneath their feet to crack and crumble under the immense pressure. The force of the impact was so great that the very foundation of the park seemed to give way. At the moment of impact, Rexy felt a terrible force surging toward her, and she was sent flying, unable to resist it. She crashed into the buildings behind her, which collapsed instantly, leaving her body buried under rubble with broken bones and torn tendons. With a single blow, Rexy was completely defeated, and to be honest, Heenan hadn't even used his full power. After all, he didn't want to bully an elderly, weakened Tyrannosaurus, so Heenan chose not to kill her. Deep down, he actually intended to bring her under his command. Claire couldn't believe she lost so quickly. She thought Rexy could at least hold him back, but the battle ended in an instant. Suddenly, Claire noticed that the Indominus was staring directly at her with a chilling intensity. His massive mouth was slightly open, revealing fangs that were still stained with fresh blood. He certainly hadn't expected his next meal to present itself so conveniently upon his arrival. 4 fierce raptors approached quickly, closing the distance in a matter of seconds. Heenan looked away. Without even realizing it, they had wiped out the film's protagonists, finishing the job perfectly. Now that he had truly become a beast, he no longer considered himself human, nor did he care for those outside his own species. His heart had changed, and he understood that the logic of the wild now applied to him as well. To him, humans were now nothing more than absolute enemies. What did it matter if someone was a protagonist, a side character, good, or evil? To a predator, it's all the same. A low cry echoed from the ruins, and it wasn't until then that Rexy managed to stand up with great difficulty. Heenan approached the fallen queen, looking down at her with his piercing scarlet pupils. He let out a low, threatening growl. After all, possessing Tyrannosaurus Rex genes had its advantages. Naturally, he was able to communicate with the old queen without any trouble at all. He gave the defeated Rexy only 2 choices: submit to his will or perish right then and there. Having been thoroughly beaten, Rexy no longer showed the arrogance and dominance she had displayed when they first met. Faced with the overwhelming power of Heenan, she had no choice but to bow her proud head in defeat. She showed him her submission, and Heenan nodded in satisfaction, introducing her to Gray and the Velociraptors. She would be a fine lieutenant, but he wasn't finished yet, especially since the raptor and T-Rex paddocks were already open. He decided then to simply open every other enclosure and release all the carnivorous dinosaurs at once. He wanted this storm to become even more intense, turning the park into a true prehistoric kingdom. No sooner said than done. Heenan immediately put Gray and the raptors into action to carry out his plan. We start with enclosure number 1, home to a pack of Compsognathus, small but deadly carnivores. Only a meter long, but once they leap onto you as a group, their bites can easily become fatal. Next is enclosure number 2, where 5 Dilophosaurus, medium-sized carnivores, are kept. At 5 meters long and weighing half a ton, they can spray a blinding venom directly from their mouths. They leave their prey blind and paralyzed. Next, we see enclosure number 4, home to 2 Carnotaurus. These are massive carnivorous dinosaurs, reaching 8 meters in length and weighing 3 tons. They measure 5 meters long and are capable of running at an extremely high speed. Then there is enclosure number 10, where a Giganotosaurus, a truly great carnivore, is kept. But he wasn't bred for sacrifice. He is genetically modified, known as the northern relative of the Giganotosaurus. As we see this northern Giganotosaurus, Heenan is already busy smashing the enclosure doors to pieces. And just like that, every single carnivorous dinosaur in the park was set free. It was the moment he officially declared that Islam Mula had fallen. It was no longer a human paradise, but a dinosaur territory, where the carnivores finally reclaimed their freedom. They let out excited roars, but in that very moment, an even more intimidating cry echoed through the air. It descended from above, and when they looked for the source, they were stunned to find a Tyrannosaurus Rex of imposing size. They recognized him instantly. It was this gigantic, terrifying Tyrannosaurus Rex. Heenan had just finished tearing down the enclosure gates, standing tall in a position of absolute power. Looking down at the other carnivores, he let out one more majestic roar, and the message was quite clear. It was submission or death, a choice the smaller Compsognathus and Dilophosaurus understood immediately. They were so terrified they huddled on the ground, while the Carnotaurus and Allosaurus also feared his frightening size. They were forced to bow their heads, but the Therizinosaurus, Spinosaurus, and Giganotosaurus weren't going to submit so easily. Heenan noted the attitude of these carnivores perfectly, separating those willing to follow from those who weren't. Naturally, he wouldn't trouble those who obeyed, but the ones who resisted, he would beat them into conviction. To be honest, Heenan didn't feel like wasting any more words on the matter. He violently lashed his dragon tail and lunged forward with incredible speed. His target was aimed directly at the strongest Giganotosaurus among the group. The Giganotosaurus was visibly startled by the sudden offensive Heenan launched against him. He rushed to dodge, but it was too late. A gigantic, overwhelming force was already upon him. The blow swept through, sending the 15-ton body of this Giganotosaurus flying like a struck baseball. Several buildings barely managed to stop the impact, effectively taking him out in a matter of seconds. Immediately after, upon landing, Heenan spun around once more in the very same spot. His tail, acting like a massive spiked club, sent the Spinosaurus flying with that strength alone. With all due respect, he seemed to be telling them, "You are all nothing but trash." A cry of horror echoed as the Quetzalcoatlus, seeing the situation turn sour, tried to fly away. He realized he couldn't win the fight, but he thought he could at least escape by taking flight. However, Heenan had already closed the distance like lightning, using his 10-meter height advantage. He snatched the creature right out of the air, even as it reached 5 meters above the ground. Finally, he slammed it hard against the last cautious Therizinosaurus, who was already terrified to his core. As they lay paralyzed on the ground, Heenan let out another dominant roar, demanding they come before him. They loyally bowed their heads to show their absolute submission to their new king. The Quetzalcoatlus, having been rubbed into the dirt, had no choice but to crawl forward obediently. Eventually, even the Giganotosaurus and the Zuching emerged from the ruins, having finally calmed down. The world of dinosaurs has always been a jungle where the strong prey upon the weak. Strength is respected, and so Henan successfully subdued every carnivore in the park, greatly expanding his forces. But we must remember, these are only the land-dwelling dinosaurs. He hadn't forgotten that in the central water park of Jurassic World, an invincible mosasaurus was also being raised. This mosasaurus is, without a doubt, the strongest creature in the entire Jurassic series. In the film, it swallowed the Indominus Rex in a single bite, much like a legendary master. Its body length exceeds at least 30 meters, making it much larger than the actual mosasaurus that lived during the Cretaceous period. Even the current Henan doesn't quite dare to provoke a direct confrontation just yet. In any case, for the time being, they simply don't interfere with one another. Henan is in no particular hurry to subdue the mosasaurus. He'll get to that later. Right now, he has something far more important to attend to. Henan called upon the Jurassic League under his command and led them grandly toward their final destination, the southern port area. The southern port area, the entire harbor of Jurassic World, is located on the southern coast of the island. It serves as the only gateway for tourists to enter and leave the park. The night is already deep, and yet we see there are still many tourists gathered here. Suddenly, in the silent night sky, a sound echoed from far off in the distance. A resonant roar. What on earth is happening? Is it thunder? The tourists at the port raised their heads toward the night sky, spotting a dark cloud approaching rapidly. As it drew closer, they discovered it wasn't a cloud at all, but a giant four-legged winged dragon soaring through the air. Even from a distance, the crowd could feel an incomparably powerful pressure and aura radiating from that giant dragon. A monster. Every human tourist who witnessed this scene fell into a state of uncontrollable panic and confusion. This giant four-legged dragon looks nothing like the dinosaurs of this world. It is, quite frankly, an absolute monster. The tourists in the pier area descended into immediate panic at the sight of the creature. And right at that moment, another group appeared from behind the docks. A pack of fierce carnivorous dinosaurs surrounded the tourists, letting out a chorus of roars and howls. It was as if they were solemnly declaring to humanity that, from this point forward, the island belongs to the dinosaurs. Amidst the chaos, the remaining tourists were forced to risk jumping into the ocean, swimming desperately to escape the pier. From this moment on, not a single human remained on Isla Nublar. It had become a true forbidden zone for mankind. Meanwhile, Henan gazed out across the vast, dark ocean into the night. What would the next day bring? More enemies, perhaps? But all of this is only the beginning. As dawn breaks, we see the rising sun begin its ascent. A new day has begun. It should have been a beautiful morning, if not for the arrival of some breaking news. The entire world was thrown into an uproar. The Jurassic World theme park, operated by Masrani Global, had suffered a massive outbreak, resulting in a staggering number of casualties among both the park's staff and the visiting tourists. On that same day, a top-secret document was delivered to the headquarters of the Manor organization. Inside the office, Dr. Incessalin had already finished reviewing the contents of this highly confidential file. He was thinking of that beast, the wild Tyrannosaurus Rex. It isn't just a dinosaur, it's a true monster, Incessalin muttered to himself. This document detailed the truth behind the Jurassic World outbreak, based on the harrowing accounts of the survivors. According to them, a terrifying four-legged winged dragon appeared at the pier, leading a horde of carnivores. Barring any mistakes, that giant dragon seen at the end is almost certainly the wild Tyrannosaurus Rex. Vivian, the assistant standing nearby, hadn't expected the Gen original leader, Kaiser, to possess yet another artificial monster. She also remarked that humanity's greed and desire would eventually destroy them by their own hands. Incessalin let out a long, weary sigh of stale air. He thought of the artificial beasts created to deal with natural ones, like the leader of the original tribe, Kaiser. Kaiser was originally just an ordinary chimpanzee, but his mother had been injected with a special drug during her pregnancy. This resulted in Kaiser possessing an intelligence far superior to any normal chimpanzee after his birth. Eventually, 2 years ago, Kaiser led the original tribe in a full-scale rebellion. They successfully occupied the Muir Woods National Forest in San Francisco. As a result, the Manor organization established outpost number 11 within that very forest. And from then on, they officially classified Kaiser as the first artificial beast. Then there are the 3 rampaging giants, George the ape, Ralph the flying wolf, and Lizzie the giant alligator. They also mutated, though in their case, it was due to the accidental consumption of a genetic company's biochemical reagent. After their rampage a year ago, the 3 furious beasts simply vanished. Their whereabouts remain unknown, proving once again that humans cannot control these artificial monsters. In the end, they only reap the consequences of their own malice. But still, the only lesson humanity learns from history is that humanity learns no lessons at all. This creature, the wild Tyrannosaurus Rex, is just another bloody lesson in the making. The tragedy has already unfolded, and by now, it is far too late for words. The Manor organization can only step in to clean up the mess, so Incessalin immediately drafted a request for his superiors, proposing they establish an outpost near Isla Nublar to monitor and investigate this wild Tyrannosaurus rex. For this purpose, Incessalin gave the wild Tyrannosaurus rex a new name, Mirarus. 3 days have now passed since the chaotic dinosaur riot at Jurassic World. Similar incidents have become quite common in recent years, with large-scale attacks by animals or monsters occurring almost annually. People have grown used to this, and so, the public interest in the incident slowly began to fade as time marched on. Yes, they are accustomed to it. The initial shocks soon dissipated, replaced by the mundane rhythm of daily life. Only the Monarch organization continues to keep a watchful eye on the situation unfolding on Isla Nublar. They have already begun raising the necessary funds and gathering the manpower required for the island. Since expelling every human from the island, Keenan has also begun the task of organizing the dinosaurs within Jurassic World. The first and most pressing issue he has to consider, naturally, is the problem of food. Without humans to care for them, the creatures must now rely entirely on hunting to survive. Keenan realized he still has to learn how to both manage his resources and find new sources of sustenance. Managing resources meant hunting with moderation, so he led the herbivores, like the Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Parasaurolophus, to the north of the island. Now, the carnivores are only permitted to go out and hunt for prey at specific, fixed times. Finding new sources, on the other hand, meant looking for food beyond the shores of Isla Nublar itself. Deep down, Keenan prefers this second option. After all, to gain more gene points, he needs to constantly hunt and devour. He also needs to seize this opportunity to scout for potential new habitats outside of his current territory. He knows that, according to the history of this world, the dormant volcano on Isla Nublar will erupt in just a few years. Before that happens, Keenan will definitely need to find another suitable place to call home. The top of the Zongan building, the highest point in all of Jurassic World, has now become his exclusive nest. Opening the simulator panel, we see Keenan begin to allocate his points as he usually does. In one go, he added all the gene points he had accumulated over the last few days into the Baryonyx gene. In a very short time, the Tyrannosaurus rex's size began to grow and expand at a speed that was clearly visible to the naked eye. Finally, Keenan's body length stabilized at an impressive 30 meters. His height reached 15 meters, and his wingspan stretched out to nearly 100 meters across. His weight hit 500 tons, far surpassing the blue whale, which is usually considered the largest animal on Earth. What truly surprised Keenan was the limitless growth potential following this evolutionary breakthrough, granting him the ability to shatter all previous limits. A length of 30 meters and a weight of 500 tons are, as it turns out, only the beginning. After completing the addition of the dragon crocodile gene, Keenan dedicated himself to strengthening his Ankylosaurus traits. By upgrading his dragon wing flight to level 3 in one go, his flight speed surged to 300 kilometers per hour, leaving the air behind him gray and empty. And the effect of this strengthening is quite obvious, to say the least. In the very next second, Keenan suddenly beat his 100-meter wide wings, which were large enough to blot out the sky. Accompanied by the moonlight reflecting off his wings, he performed an incredibly skillful catapult takeoff, soaring straight into the sky like a rocket. He patrolled the entirety of Isla Nublar, and wherever he went, he left a wind pressure in his wake that felt like a localized explosion. In addition to this, over the last few days, he also managed to acquire 2 new genetic abilities. These were the posterior cranial bone from the Pachycephalosaurus gene and the sound wave emission from the Parasaurolophus gene. First, let's look at the posterior cranial bone of the Pachycephalosaurus gene. After fusing this gene, Keenan's skull bones became significantly thicker and harder than before. Secondly, we have the sound wave emission from the Parasaurolophus gene. After fusing it, even though he doesn't have a physical sound crest on his head, he gained the ability to emit powerful sound waves. Furthermore, he can arbitrarily control both the frequency and the pitch of these sounds. Its function is incredibly broad, allowing him to receive information transmitted through sound waves and sonar detection. It can even be used as a sonic weapon, which is quite a handy trick for our explosive Tyrannosaurus rex. His physical data now stands at an imposing 30 meters in length and 15 meters in height. With his weight at 500 tons, he realizes he still has far too few genetic points to spend. Keenan sighed as he flew, realizing that the time had finally come to leave Isla Nublar. He needed to head out and find more prey, as his life level had remained stuck at the first order for far too long. To be honest, Keenan still has no idea how to actually improve his life level. He is particularly unsure about what the next stage of his evolution even looks like. But before that, we see him decide to resolve the last hidden danger in Jurassic World, the Mosasaurus. He prepares to greet his subject at Lake Area 11, located right in the center of the park. This is the aquatic enclosure where the massive Mosasaurus is kept. Over the last few days, the Mosasaurus in Lake 11 has been growing increasingly restless. The reason is simple. For several days in a row, no humans have come to feed it. All of this, naturally, was done under Keenan's specific instructions. Leaving the Mosasaurus to starve for so long was a calculated move to greatly reduce its combat power. Now, with the creature weakened, it is the perfect moment to finally subdue the beast. Keenan flew across the island and soon arrived in the sky directly above Lake Area 11. Beneath the seemingly calm surface of the water, we can see the currents churning rapidly. In the very next second, the water exploded as if hit by a depth charge, sending spray everywhere. A terrifying, bloody maw lunged directly at Keenan in the sky, waiting for its massive power to take hold. The fish has taken the bait, and Keenan boldly extends his sickle-shaped claws to grab the creature's jaws. The Mosasaurus certainly didn't expect his opponent to use such an insidious trick, attempting to force his upper and lower jaws shut. But the power Keenan unleashed was far greater than his own. Not only could he not close his mouth, but his entire body was held firm. Keenan settled into position without hesitation and began to lift the creature toward the water's surface. Slowly but surely, the great aquatic beast was hoisted up and pulled completely out of the water. The Mosasaurus panicked completely, twisting and struggling frantically like a fish deprived of oxygen. But against our Tyrannosaurus rex, whose size is now much larger than his own, such efforts are completely useless. With a powerful surge, Keenan then threw him with all his might, tossing the creature onto the dry land. Had this been an underwater battle, Keenan might have struggled. After all, he isn't exactly built for the water. To be honest, there would have still been quite a few risks in facing the Mosasaurus in its own element. But by shifting to an aerial or land-based battle, that demonic sea creature was left entirely at Keenan's mercy. Even after crashing onto the shore, the Mosasaurus continued to struggle violently due to its enormous size. Nearby, Gray and Lekian were watching the scene unfold, and they were understandably terrified. They couldn't help but be shocked by the massive scale and the terrible destructive power of the aquatic beast. And yet, they found themselves even more astonished by something else entirely. They were watching Keenan, who was systematically overpowering a monster of that magnitude. Not long after, the exhausted Mosasaurus finally began to slow down, its strength spent. He had become little more than a helpless prize, ready to be dealt with as Keenan saw fit. Only then did our Tyrannosaurus rex descend from the air and land firmly on the ground. He let out a majestic roar at the dying Mosasaurus, whose life was clearly reaching its end. The creature had no fight left in him, and he had no choice but to succumb to Keenan's imposing presence. After the blue dragon expressed his complete submission, Keenan sent him back into the waters of Lake Area 11, ultimately choosing to spare his life. And finally, he also gave the blue dragon a leftover dinosaur carcass so that the starving creature could eat his fill at a leisurely pace. In the future, if I eat a bite of rice, you will have a sip of soup. I will also set you free, for the outer ocean is far more vast than this small lake. Keenan conveyed his meaning clearly through his deep, guttural voice. Like many other dinosaurs, the blue dragon had lived here from infancy to adulthood. He had been imprisoned in such a narrow lake for his entire life. Now that the Jurassic World power facilities have been destroyed, the high-voltage power grid has naturally lost its effect. The walls also opened, and Lake 11 was finally connected to the outer ocean. The blue dragon understood his meaning and let out a low, melodious roar that revealed a sincere feeling of gratitude. And so, as of now, the Jurassic Alliance has been completely reunited. Keenan once again flapped his massive membranous wings. He rose sharply into the air and let out a silent, commanding roar. This was the signal for the members of the Jurassic Alliance under Gray's command to gather. The Quetzalcoatlus took flight, soaring high into the sky. Amidst a multitude of pterosaurs, the Mosasaurus emerged from the depths of the lake. On land, the Pteranodon stood apart from the Tyrannosaurus rex. Many carnivorous dinosaurs, such as the Giganotosaurus and the Zeuxingtyrannus, rushed forward quickly. This formation and this posture represent the true return of the Dragon King in real life. Over these last few days, an election of sorts was also held within the Jurassic Alliance. As the one leading all the dinosaurs, Keenan was naturally chosen as the Jurassic Dragon King. He took the top spot, followed in second place by the sister of the Dragon King, the Pteranodon. Next, we see the appointment of the 5 Jurassic Dragon Generals. These were, respectively, the Mosasaurus, the Giganotosaurus, and the Tyrannosaurus rex, along with the Quetzalcoatlus and the Zeuxingtyrannus, followed by the 8 Jurassic Dragon Riders. And so, the Jurassic world has been formally established, with a rather iconic motto. Make the dragon race great again. Ding! Congratulations, you have conquered the Jurassic world. You have obtained a reward of 2,000 gene points. A message from the simulator suddenly appeared in Hyanan's mind. The Jurassic world was complete. Hyanan stood stunned for a moment before a flood of information hit him. It rushed into his mind, giving him a much clearer understanding of the world he actually inhabited. As it turns out, this wasn't just the world of the Jurassic World movies. It was a fusion, a cinematic universe of sorts. Planet of the Apes, The War, Rampage, Devastation, The Great Wall, The Meg. Even Skull Island and Godzilla were part of this reality. The Jurassic dinosaurs are really just the tip of the iceberg, aren't they? This world was far from being as simple as he had originally imagined. To be honest, it seems the Jurassic World may have just been the tutorial. King Kong, Godzilla, Ghidorah, and all the other Titan monsters. They are all real, and some of them stand well over 100 meters tall. King Kong, Godzilla, Ghidorah, these legendary titans actually exist here. It's true, they are very real, and they tower over the world at heights of more than 100 meters. We are talking about Titan monsters that weigh tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, of tons. Interesting, isn't it? Rhiannon quickly accepted this reality, and he began to see much grander possibilities for his future. And it is precisely because of this that the future has become so much more challenging. Returning to the present, those 2,000 newly acquired gene points are perfect for advancing his remaining dragon genes. He focuses on the Pachycephalosaurus gene and the dragon replication gene, aiming for dragon flight and wings. The Pachycephalosaurus gene advances to supersonic flight, and the durability of his wings increases fivefold. His flight speed can now actually reach the speed of sound. That is roughly 1,224,000 meters per hour. With the Pachycephalosaurus gene placed in his back, his skull advances, becoming a structure of copper-like hardness and iron bones. His entire skeleton is strengthened, reaching a level of resistance comparable to solid steel. Next is the dragon replication gene, specifically the sound wave emission. This advances to a sound wave pulse, where high-energy waves from his mouth are compressed and fired at high speeds. The result is an incredibly powerful shockwave. Before long, the leveling process for all three genes comes to an end. And this, as we might expect, brought Rhiannon a truly transcendental physical upgrade. Now that the internal threats have been resolved and a sense of order has finally been established, Rhiannon began preparing himself to expand his reach outward into the world. He decided he could head to Isla Sorna first to see what he might find there. After reflecting for a moment, the primary objective he chose was clear. Isla Sorna, the sister island to Isla Nublar, would be his next destination. So, after giving Gray his instructions, he took flight and headed directly toward the west. Aiming straight for Isla Sorna, he left Isla Nublar behind, and the vast, limitless ocean appeared before his eyes. We see that Isla Sorna is located away from Isla Nublar, roughly 140 kilometers to the west. But for Rhiannon, a distance like that is really only a matter of a few minutes. As he soared through the sky, Rhiannon began to steadily increase his pace. His flight speed grew faster and faster with every passing second. Naturally, the air resistance he encountered became increasingly intense as well. The air accumulating in front of him was completely squeezed and forced aside by his sheer momentum. Shockwaves formed from his head to his tail, erupting in a roar that sounded like a golden explosion of thunder. A sonic boom. This confirms that Rhiannon has, at this very moment, broken the sound barrier. He had truly achieved flight at the speed of sound, a terrifying feat, to be honest. Meanwhile, on Isla Sorna, a small advance team from the Monair organization had already arrived in several Black Hawk helicopters. Another isolated island in the middle of the sea. I'm already sick of islands, one of them complained. The man speaking was the captain of this small advance team, James Conrad. He was previously a forward agent for the British Air Force Special Forces. Back in 1973, he was sent on a mission. It was to a mysterious island in the South Pacific known as Skull Island. Although he fortunately escaped that living hell, he was never quite the same. After joining Monair, James also developed a certain reputation. He had a deep-seated aversion to similar islands, but this time, the Monair High Command insisted. They asked him and Dayton Way to lead a small advance team to Isla Sorna. Their goal was the exploration of the critical point at outpost number 13. Don't worry, this is just a simple mission to scout the critical point, he was told. They were on Isla Sorna, and there wasn't much time left to finish the job. But in all likelihood, it wouldn't be nearly as terrifying as Skull Island. Acting as the sub-captain, James wiped the sweat from his forehead and spoke. He didn't know why, but deep down, he had a very bad feeling about this. The small advance team eventually confirmed the critical point's location. And so, they boarded the Black Hawk helicopters one by one. They were ready to return and report to Monair when, suddenly, thump. Out of nowhere, a massive stone came flying horizontally through the air. It struck one of the Black Hawk helicopters that had just taken off with pinpoint precision. The impact shattered the propeller, and the Black Hawk lost all power immediately. It fell straight out of the sky, crashing violently into the ground. What on earth? What is happening? Waifu witnessed the scene and couldn't help but cry out in shock. Calm. James seemed to have discovered something truly unsettling. It was as if his body had been struck by lightning, and his eyes widened in complete disbelief. Kong, Waifu shouted, though she knew Kong was supposed to be back on Skull Island. How could he possibly appear here on Isla Sorna? But in the very next second, we see the truth. A gigantic albino gorilla came charging out from the depths of the forest. He was a mass of powerful muscle, standing 12 meters tall and weighing a staggering 9 tons. The albino gorilla reared up and began thumping his chest with those massive, robust arms. He let out a deafening roar, and we realize this isn't Kong at all. It is one of the 3 giant, frenzied monsters that tore through Chicago just a year ago. George, the albino gorilla. Waifu recognized him instantly, and to be honest, she was stunned. The people at Manark had been searching for these 3 rampaging giants for over a year. They never imagined the creatures had been hiding here all along, on an island completely desolate and forgotten by the rest of humanity. Alert! Alert! Black Hawk 3 has gone down. Black Hawk 2, move in for the rescue. James was barely managing to keep his composure. He immediately began barking orders through the communicator to manage the chaos. But just then, an even larger giant forest wolf came bursting through the trees. The wolf's entire body was covered in deep black fur, as sharp and lethal as sewing needles. Its four long, slender legs moved with the terrifying precision of a cheetah's blades. They gleamed with a chilling edge, while spines much like those of a porcupine had sprouted along its back and tail. The creature's body stretched to a length of 26 meters. Its shoulder height reached 14 meters, standing tall above the forest floor. With those shoulders weighing nearly 14 tons, the only logical choice was a tactical retreat. James took the controls himself, personally piloting the Black Hawk 1 helicopter. He quickly gained altitude, banking hard to escape toward the eastern maritime area. Seeing that the albino gorilla and the flying wolf weren't giving chase, James finally allowed himself a sigh of relief. But then, we see a giant crocodile, one even larger than the gorilla and the wolf combined. Its body reached a staggering length of 68 meters, standing over 18 meters high. Weighing a massive 150 tons, the giant crocodile Liz made James feel his heart sink to his stomach. George the gorilla and Ralph the wolf had merely inhaled the vapors of the biochemical gene potion. Their dosage had been limited, but the giant crocodile Liz had swallowed the entire bottle of the serum directly. Yes, Liz had consumed the entire concentrated dose of that biochemical gene potion. And so, the resulting mutation was far more terrifying than anything they had seen before. The crocodile's bloody maw snapped precisely onto the tail of Black Hawk 1, violently jerking it from the sky. "It's coming for us. Brace for impact," James screamed with a hoarse voice, as this nightmare scenario felt all too familiar to him. With a deafening crash, the diving Black Hawk 1 slammed into the coastline. The seawater softened the blow, allowing James and Waifu to unbuckle their belts and scramble from the wreckage. However, just as they broke the surface, they saw the mountain-like body of Liz the crocodile looming right in front of them. That bloody maw and those interlocking fangs were enough to make his stomach turn. They were so close that, standing before such a gargantuan beast, they were simply two ants. Just as James and Waze thought they were doomed, sudden sonic booms echoed from the distant sky like rolling thunder. Even from that distance, James and Waze felt their eardrums vibrate the moment they heard that roar. As if momentarily deafened, the giant crocodile Liz let out a low growl of pain, ignoring the two little ants for a moment. She turned her massive body, looking toward the source of that thunderous sound. And then, we see it. As they recovered from the shock, James and Waze looked up to see a towering, four-legged dragon figure. The figure was approaching at an absolutely astonishing speed. Each flap of those 100-meter wings, which literally covered the sky, sent a howling hurricane across the coast of Sorna Island. Could it be the tyrant T-Rex from Nublar Island, Mirrorus? The two exclaimed in unison, recognizing the opponent's true identity based on the intel they had seen before departing. To be honest, Mirrorus' body seemed to have grown even larger than the reports suggested. Furthermore, how could his flight speed be so fast that it produced sonic booms, clearly reaching the speed of sound? Amidst the howling peaks, the giant crocodile stands tall alongside Ralph, the flying wolf. George, the albino gorilla, was also letting out furious roars of his own. For them, Sorna Island was their territory, and this giant dragon was an absolute invader, a beast to be reckoned with. And here, we notice that these three giant beasts seem a little familiar. The newcomer is none other than John Nan, who came to investigate Sorna Island, finding an albino gorilla, a flying wolf, and a giant crocodile. These are, quite literally, the three giant beasts from the movie Rampage. They had appeared on Sorna Island, and in this case, it was truly a matter of better late than never. Just in time, he thought, as he was still desperately short on gene points. Ordinary animals only provided him with a miserable pittance of points, hardly worth the effort. Only by hunting more powerful creatures, and even giant beasts, could he hope to earn more. To him, these three beasts from Rampage looked quite plump and juicy, metaphorically speaking, of course. The gene points they would yield were bound to be substantial. John Nan first set his sights on George, the albino gorilla, who happened to be the smallest of the trio. His enormous dragon body tensed as he plummeted from the sky like a falling meteor. A terrifying shadow completely enveloped the gorilla below. George the albino gorilla saw the Tyrannosaurus Rex approaching and hoisted the massive rock he had intended for the helicopter. The albino gorilla George watched the Tyrannosaurus Rex closing in, raising high the great boulder he had just thrown at the helicopter. And with all his might, he smashed it directly against the dragon's head. John Nan didn't even bother to dodge, allowing the massive rock to strike him full force. There was a single, thunderous crack, and the entire boulder shattered into 1,000 pieces. John Nan had utilized his genes. His skull of copper and bones of iron, strengthened by evolution, withstood the impact perfectly. He suffered no damage at all, while the gorilla's hopes died in that instant. In the very next second, Jiannen's powerful forelimbs swung into action. His cold, razor-sharp steel claws used the momentum of his lightning-fast dive to strike. He tore into the neck of George the albino gorilla, severing the head in one swift motion. The scene was like a sharp knife slicing through soft fruit, clean and effortless. George the albino gorilla, who had been so full of life just a moment ago, suddenly lost everything. His spirit had already departed from his body, leaving behind nothing more than a headless corpse. Congratulations were in order, as he had successfully hunted a mutated silverback gorilla. He obtained 1,000 gene points, while the genetic analysis revealed the silverback's incredible muscle density gene. There was the bloodlust gene, promising infinite growth, and the rage gene, which offered high-speed development. Even a potassium-based gene was found, capable of multiplying explosive strength 100-fold. 1,000 gene points. It was clear that this hunt had been well worth the effort. When it comes to giant beasts, the gene points they yield are truly substantial. To Jiannen's surprise, after hunting the lizard, he actually extracted 4 distinct animal genes from its body. It seemed the biochemical agent causing the mutation was still hard at work within the creature. But for now, he decided to wait until the battle was over to collect the rest of his spoils. As the fighting raged on, James and Virgil tried to slip away quickly while the giant beasts were distracted. Our 2 humans wanted nothing more than to escape this scene of ferocious carnage. They knew all too well that one careless step from these giants would crush them like insignificant ants. At that moment, Ralph the flying wolf exploded forward with the astonishing speed of a cheetah. He leaped fiercely, opening his blood-stained maw to pounce upon the Tyrannosaurus Rex. However, Ralph's savage bite failed to pierce Jiannen's armored scales as he had hoped. Instead, he shattered his own teeth, as if he were biting down on an impossibly hard plate of iron. With his attack failed, Ralph acted like a true assassin, spreading his limbs to catch the air and leap away. He wanted to escape to a safe distance, but Jiannen had no intention of letting him go so easily. A powerful hind leg pushed off the ground with a sudden, violent leap. Working in perfect tandem with a pair of dragon claws, that massive body rose high into the air. In a fluid series of movements, he reached out and snatched Ralph the flying wolf by his hind leg. With nothing more than a casual tug, the T-Rex slammed Ralph's small body down onto the hard earth. Immediately after, the dragon's weight followed, crushing down and stomping heavily onto Ralph's head. Under more than 500 tons of pressure, Ralph let out a final, agonized cry and was instantly silenced. And so, we see he has successfully hunted a mutated flying wolf, earning himself 3,000 gene points. Genetic analysis revealed that the flying wolf's genes offered an even higher level of endurance enhancement. By comparison, Ralph provided a far greater bounty of gene points than the previous creatures. The animal genes fused within his body were also significantly more complex, which was to be expected, really. Before Ralph even had a chance to recover or pull away, his body simply gave out under the sheer force. Meanwhile, the giant crocodile lizard, massive but slow-moving, had finally managed to close the distance to Heenan. This fellow is not just enormous. He possesses both terrifying offensive power and an incredibly sturdy defense. His bloody maw, capable of a frightening bite force, is more than enough to crush a military tank. The thick, ossified scale armor covering his body can easily shrug off any conventional human weaponry. He is not an easy opponent to handle, and as he drew near, the once sluggish lizard suddenly whipped his head around. His upper body recoiled and then snapped forward violently, just like a coiled spring being released. With a powerful explosion of movement, Heenan felt nothing but a whistling gust of wind rushing toward him. The lizard's massive mouth opened in an exaggerated arc, aiming directly for Heenan's neck, a dangerous target indeed. If combined with the crocodile's signature death roll, the consequences for our protagonist would be truly disastrous. It's just that Heenan's reaction speed was simply faster. His psychic perception allowed him to predict the crocodile lizard's movements in advance, precisely grabbing its upper and lower jaws and violently forcing them open. The crocodile lizard realized the danger and thrashed about in a panic, but by then, it was already too late. Its entire massive mouth was forcibly torn open from the corners, leaving it unable to close its jaws ever again. In absolute agony, the crocodile lizard let out a harrowing howl of pain. The massive beast struggled desperately and somehow managed to break free from the Tyrannosaurus Rex's grip. Seeing this, Heenan decided to bypass the armor and break the creature's defenses directly from the inside. Utilizing the power of violent, jarring strikes, he aimed his blows directly at the crocodile lizard's internal bone structure. After Heenan landed more than 10 consecutive heavy blows, the surrounding area was riddled with craters, and he found the lizard had completely blacked out. Nearly every bone in its body had been reduced to powdered debris, and its frame collapsed, turning into a massive heap of meat at his mercy. And so, we see he has hunted a mutated American alligator, earning 10,000 gene points and unlocking its genetic analysis. The alligator gene provides level 1 bone armor, a very sturdy addition, indeed. It was quite a harvest, having successfully hunted 3 wild giant beasts in one go. This sudden turn of events brought him a total of 14,000 gene points. We hear the system offer its congratulations for completing the hunt of the wild beasts. As a reward, he received 3 rage potions from the genetic energy company featured in the movie Rampage. This is a developed biochemical agent containing a variety of animal genes capable of triggering rapid genetic mutations. At that moment, another notification echoed in Heenan's ears regarding the rage potion. Heenan was pleasantly surprised, noting that this was a valuable find, even if he didn't personally need it. After all, he already possesses the various animal genes found in the potion, and with that, the battle finally came to an end. As the smoke and dust gradually cleared, Heenan noticed James and Babe on the ground, looking as small as ants due to a walking human. He realized that, much like we ignore tiny insects, he hadn't even noticed these minuscule humans while immersed in the heat of battle. And yet, these 2 humans looked strangely familiar. Wasn't that Loki, the god of mischief, and Captain Marvel? But Heenan soon discovered they were just ordinary people, likely drawn here by the 3 wild giant beasts from before. Nearby lay a downed Black Hawk helicopter, its fuselage clearly marked with a flat, funnel-shaped logo. It was the Monarch organization. Heenan finally recognized it, realizing these 2 humans actually hailed from the Monsterverse. One has to wonder, what exactly is the Monarch organization doing here on Isla Sorna? Were they tracking those 3 wild beasts, or was their true objective the Jurassic dinosaurs themselves? In any case, Heenan wanted no human surveillance in his territory, Monarch included, as James and Babe finally began to move. They stood up from the devastated ground, but a sudden, bone-chilling shiver ran through them as they slowly raised their heads. They found the scarlet-red dragon eyes of Milo Ruiz staring them down, followed by a terrifying shadow from above. The dragon's legs, massive as celestial pillars, came crashing down to crush them like mere ants. Afterward, Heenan took a moment to open his data panel and review his current status. His body data now showed a length of 30 meters, a height of 15 meters, and a staggering weight of 1,000 tons. To humanity, he was now the ultimate monster, as Heenan expected, while his length and height remained steady. The significant increase in muscle density had caused his weight to double, officially surpassing the 1,000-ton mark. Combined with an explosive power 1,000 times greater than before, his maximum output could now reach 1,000,000 tons. Furthermore, we see he has gained a high-speed regeneration ability. As long as his body isn't completely destroyed, he can now regenerate himself over time, a handy trick, to be sure. And so, with more and more animal genes fusing within him, his evolution continues to reach terrifying new heights. There are 18 types in total, and we see that his focus remains on enhancing the body structure of his primary gene. This, of course, serves as the very foundation for his growing strength. With over 10,000 genetic points remaining, Heenan continued to invest in his unlimited physical growth, causing his body to expand once more. Every single part of the Tyrannosaurus Rex's body welcomed another round of explosive growth. Finally, his body length increased to 50 meters, while his height surged past the 25-meter mark. His weight skyrocketed to 5,000 tons, comparable to a conventional naval destroyer, to be honest. The remaining 5,000 genetic points were used to upgrade his steel-plated skin, his iron muscles, and his copper-reinforced bones. He also made sure to sharpen his steel teeth and claws, ensuring his offensive capabilities were just as formidable. After spending nearly all his points, Heenan returned to reality and resumed his patrol across the entirety of Isla Sorna. He soon discovered that there were almost no living creatures left on the island. However, the overall ecological environment of Isla Sorna remained relatively well-preserved despite the chaos. With no man-made damage to speak of, the island's environment is still perfectly suited for dinosaurs to thrive. Deep down, Heenan began planning to claim this place as his second base of operations. But time was running short. Without him even noticing, the sky had already begun to darken. Heenan decided not to linger on Isla Sorna any longer that evening. Suddenly, he unfurled a pair of dragon wings with a staggering wingspan of 150 meters. He officially took flight once again, carrying the carcasses of the 3 giant beasts back toward Isla Nublar.